Welcome to Veiled Narratives, where emotions are unmasked, hearts are tested, and love finds its way back through the veils of time. Tonight we dive into a story of heartbreak, fate, and redemption. A tale where love that once broke apart is destined to meet again under the open skies of a countryside farm. The morning sun rose gently over the sprawling acres of Harrison Ridge Farm, a place where luxury met the quiet rhythm of country life. Alexander Knight, a billionaire known for his sharp business mind and cold demeanor, stood on his porch sipping coffee, surveying his land, his only solace since his divorce 3 years ago. He had everything a man could buy: power, property, and prestige, but not peace. His heart still carried the ghost of the woman he once loved, Isabella Monroe, the only one who saw the man behind the empire. Their love had been fierce and fragile, burning too bright and collapsing under misunderstandings, pride, and pain. That morning, fate decided to play its hand. A new caretaker was arriving to help with the farm's expansion. A recommendation from his manager. When Alexander walked towards the stable, he froze. Standing there, wearing a simple white dress and sun hat, was Isabella. Time stood still. Her golden hair shimmered in the sunlight, and beside her stood 3 identical toddlers, all with his storm-gray eyes, the eyes that could never lie. For a moment, the world blurred, his chest tightened as his mind raced. Triplets, his eyes, his dimples. Isabella turned, her breath catching as their gazes collided, the past crashing into the present. "Alexander," she whispered. "Why are they here, Isabella?" His voice broke, equal parts disbelief and yearning. "Because they deserve to know where they came from," she said softly. In the days that followed, tension turned to tenderness. Alexander watched his sons play in the fields, their laughter echoing through the golden wheat. He had missed their first steps, their first words, their first everything. Each moment was a reminder of what pride had cost him. Isabella had left because she couldn't bear the loneliness of being married to a man who lived for work, not love. But standing on that farm now, surrounded by memories and innocence, both began to rediscover what once bound them together: the pure magic of connection. Alexander wasn't the same man anymore. He no longer spoke with arrogance but with humility. He began spending his evenings with the triplets, telling them stories, teaching them to ride ponies, laughing again after years of silence. One night, as the sun dipped into the horizon, he found Isabella sitting under the old oak tree, the same place where he once promised her forever. "I thought I'd lost you," he said, his voice trembling. "You did," she replied gently. "But maybe we both needed to lose each other to learn what love really means." He stepped closer, his eyes glistening. "Isabella, come home. Not for them, for us, for what we could still be." She hesitated, tears filling her eyes. "And if I say yes, then I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'll never let you walk away again." The wind whispered through the leaves as she finally leaned into his chest. The pain, the years, the distance, melting away. The triplets ran toward them, giggling, wrapping their tiny arms around their parents. For the first time in years, the Knight family was whole again. And as the stars shimmered over Harrison Ridge, Isabella realized something. Some love stories aren't meant to end. They're just waiting for the right chapter to begin again. The morning light spilled like molten gold over the sprawling expanse of Harrison Ridge Estate, where every inch of land whispered wealth and solitude. From the grand marble mansion perched on the hill to the silent fields stretching beyond the horizon, everything bore the mark of one man: Alexander Knight, the billionaire whose name was synonymous with precision, power, and perfection. To the world, Alexander was the man who conquered everything: the markets, the luxury hotels, the global headlines. But behind that flawless image was a man quietly haunted by the one thing he could never master: love. 3 years ago, his heart had shattered in silence when he signed those divorce papers. No scandal, no drama, just an empty signature that ended the most passionate love story he had ever known. Isabella Monroe, the woman who had once filled his world with warmth and laughter, had walked away. And since then, the house had grown colder, just like him. The corridors of his mansion echoed only with footsteps. No laughter, no music, no softness. His life had become a routine of meetings, mergers, and meaningless success. Every morning, he stood by the same floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the vast land below, pretending he didn't see her ghost in every sunrise. Isabella. Her name alone was enough to tighten his chest. He remembered her laughter like a song, light, genuine, and free. He remembered the way her hand used to slip into his when they walked through these same fields, barefoot, chasing sunsets and dreams. She had loved the farm more than the city, calling it a piece of heaven on earth. He had called it a distraction from business, and maybe that was where it all began to fall apart. He had built an empire, but in doing so, he lost the only person who made it worth ruling. Now, as the sun painted the morning sky, he stepped out onto his veranda, the cool air brushing his skin. The world outside was perfect. The vineyard shimmered with dew, the horses moved gracefully in the paddock, and the scent of roses drifted through the breeze. Yet, for Alexander, perfection had never felt so empty. He sipped his coffee slowly, staring into nothing, lost in thoughts that no amount of wealth could erase. In moments like this, he often wondered, what was she doing now? Did she ever think of him? Did she still hate him for the way things ended? He remembered the last night they shared, the storm outside matching the storm within. "You don't need me, Alexander," she had whispered through tears. "You only need your empire." He had watched her leave, too proud to stop her, too broken to admit she was right. Since then, nights had been long, and mornings, lifeless. He threw himself into work, chasing deals, building more, buying more, but every victory felt hollow. The whispers of loneliness crept into his sleep, and sometimes, he swore he could still smell her perfume in the empty halls. Jasmine and rain. Even his staff noticed the change. The once vibrant man who loved to host lavish gatherings had withdrawn into silence. The grand piano in the main hall hadn't been played in years, not since the day Isabella's delicate fingers last danced across its keys. Yet, beneath the surface of his stoic exterior, a part of Alexander still waited, not for forgiveness, but for one more chance. That chance would arrive when he least expected it. Because somewhere beyond the hill, fate had already begun weaving the threads of an impossible reunion. As the estate manager approached him that morning, carrying a clipboard, Alexander barely listened. Something about new staff joining the team for the farm's expansion project, caretakers, assistants, and a woman who would manage the animal shelters. He nodded absently, unaware that the name on that file, Isabella Monroe, would soon turn his world upside down. For now he walked toward the stables, unaware that destiny was waiting just beyond the barn doors. In the form of the woman he loved, and 3 tiny souls who would change everything, he thought he knew about life and love. The birds sang in the distance as sunlight bathed the estate in warmth. Yet, for Alexander, the world remained cold, the kind of cold that comes not from winter, but from a heart that forgot what it means to be loved. Little did he know, the warmth he'd lost was already on its way back to him. And when it arrived, it would come with laughter, innocence, and 3 pairs of gray eyes that mirrored his own. The morning air was soft and fragrant as the sun climbed higher over Harrison Ridge Farm, draping everything in hues of amber and gold. The dew on the grass glistened like diamonds, and the distant hum of nature painted a picture of peace. The kind of peace that comes only before something extraordinary is about to happen. Alexander Knight adjusted his cufflinks, his usual calm demeanor masking the restlessness inside him. He had a meeting scheduled with the new caretaker his manager had hired, a woman who was supposed to oversee the animal shelters and manage the expansion of his farm. Normally, he wouldn't bother with such trivialities, but lately, he had been trying to reconnect with the simple, human part of life he had lost. As he walked across the polished marble floors toward the stables, the morning light filtered through the arched windows, illuminating his reflection. Tall, poised, handsome, yet wary, his perfectly tailored white shirt clung to his broad frame, and his dark eyes carried a storm that hadn't cleared in years. When he stepped outside, the soft scent of lavender greeted him, and with it, something else. Something achingly familiar. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks again. He had imagined her before, in the kitchen, on the porch, in the garden. But this time, it wasn't his imagination, because there she was, Isabella Monroe, standing by the stables, sunlight catching in her hair like strands of gold, wearing a simple cream dress that fluttered softly in the wind. Time seemed to pause, his breath caught in his chest as every buried emotion came rushing back. Love, regret, longing, disbelief. He blinked once, twice, as if his eyes were deceiving him. But she was real as the pulse pounding in his veins. For a long, endless moment, neither of them moved. The world faded, the wind stopped, the birds went silent, leaving only the sound of their hearts remembering. Then movement. A giggle, light, innocent, musical, broke the silence. Alexander's gaze shifted downward, and that's when his world shattered completely. 3 small children, no older than 3, were playing in the grass near her. 3 little boys with soft curls, angelic smiles, and his eyes. Those unmistakable storm gray eyes that had always been his most defining feature. The cup of coffee in his hand slipped, falling soundlessly onto the ground. His lips parted, but words refused to come. Triplets. They look exactly like me. He felt his chest tighten, 1,000 questions colliding inside him. The years apart, the silence, the loneliness. It all made sense now. Isabella wasn't alone. She had left him carrying a secret, their secret. Isabella turned her eyes wide and filled with the same storm he felt in his own. For a heartbeat she froze, caught between guilt and longing. Then she whispered, "Alexander." His name left her lips like a prayer and a wound all at once. He took a slow step forward, his voice deep and unsteady. "Isabella, what is this?" Her throat bobbed as she tried to find the right words. The children, sensing the tension, ran to her legs, hiding behind her dress. "They're my sons," she said softly. He stared at her, disbelief painted across his face. "Your sons." Her gaze lifted to meet his, trembling, brave, beautiful. "Our sons." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with all the years they'd lost, the apologies they'd never spoken, the nights they'd spent apart while their children grew. Alexander's heart pounded in his chest. His mind screamed for answers, but his soul could only stare. The sight of those children, his children, stirred something deep and uncontrollable inside him. A fierce, aching mix of love, shock, and sorrow. He crouched slowly, his voice softer now. "What are their names?" "Ethan, Elijah, and Evan," she replied, her voice breaking. "They were born 6 months after I left." His eyes glistened. 6 months after the divorce. While he was signing business contracts, drowning himself in work, pretending not to miss her, she had been bringing their sons into the world alone. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. He looked at the little boys again, the way one of them tilted his head like he always did when curious, the way another smirked slightly, just like him when amused. Every tiny detail mirrored his essence. They were his blood, his legacy, his second chance at life. When he finally stood, his voice was almost a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Isabella looked down, her fingers trembling as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Because you weren't the man who could love them then," she said. "You were too busy loving your empire. I wanted to protect them from a world that didn't know how to love gently." Her words cut deep, not out of cruelty but truth. He had built walls of steel, and now those walls stood between him and his own children. But beneath the pain, something else bloomed, hope. Because even though she had kept them from him, she was here now. Fate had brought her back to his land, his world, as if destiny had finally decided it was time for him to learn what love truly meant. Alexander's voice softened, filled with both awe and emotion. "They look just like me." A small smile touched Isabella's lips. "They have your eyes," she whispered. "And your stubbornness." For the first time in years, Alexander laughed, a deep, genuine sound that startled even him. And as his laughter mingled with the children's, the walls inside him began to crumble. The billionaire who once believed he had everything finally realized. He had been living without the only things that truly mattered: love, family, and the woman whose absence had turned his heart to stone. And as the wind carried the scent of lavender and memory, Alexander knew his life was about to change forever. The following days at Harrison Ridge Farm unfolded like a dream Alexander never knew he needed. The quiet fields that once echoed with silence now sang with laughter, small, melodic, innocent laughter that could melt even the coldest heart. The triplets, Ethan, Elijah, and Evan, had breathed life back into the estate, and unknowingly, into the man who had forgotten what joy sounded like. Each morning, the billionaire who once ruled boardrooms and luxury skyscrapers could now be found kneeling in the grass, helping his sons feed the horses or teaching them how to ride the smallest pony, a gentle brown mare named Daisy. His once perfectly pressed suits were replaced by rolled-up sleeves and soft smiles. And Isabella, she watched quietly from a distance, her heart a battlefield of emotions. Every time she saw Alexander laugh, holding one of the boys in his arms, a part of her soul healed, and another part trembled. Because she remembered the man he used to be, cold, consumed by ambition, untouchable. But this Alexander, this man covered in hay and sunlight, laughing until tears glistened in his eyes. He was someone she had only dreamed he could become. He was no longer the billionaire lost in his empire. He was simply a father, rediscovering love through the purity of his children. One afternoon, the sun dipped low across the horizon, spilling shades of gold and rose over the meadows. Alexander stood beside the wooden fence, watching the triplets chase butterflies, their laughter rising like music into the wind. Isabella approached quietly, holding a tray of lemonade, her white dress glowing in the warm light. He turned as she neared, his eyes softening instantly. "They've taken over the whole farm," he said, smiling. "I think even the horses report to them now." Isabella laughed, that same sweet, melodic sound that once filled their mansion years ago. "They have a way of doing that," she replied. "They win over everyone." He looked at her then, really looked. Her eyes, deep and gentle, carried stories untold. There were traces of exhaustion, yes, but also resilience, strength, and love. The kind of love that had raised 3 children on her own. "You did this all by yourself," he said quietly, his tone reverent. "All these years you raised them alone." She looked away, a single tear threatening to fall. "I did what I had to. They needed love, stability. I couldn't give them both if I stayed in your world." His throat tightened. "You think I wouldn't have given them love?" She met his gaze, her voice trembling. "You didn't even know how to give it to me." The truth stung, but Alexander didn't argue. Because she was right. The man he was then wouldn't have understood the beauty of mornings like this. Simple, imperfect, human. He had been chasing power while the real treasure was slipping through his fingers. Now, watching his sons run barefoot through the grass, he finally understood. Love isn't something to own. It's something to live. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the farm, Alexander joined the boys near the old oak tree. The same tree where he once proposed to Isabella years ago. The triplets were trying to build a castle out of stones and twigs, their tiny hands working with focus and delight. "Papa, look," one of them said, holding up a crooked tower. Alexander froze. "Papa." The word hit him like lightning, tender and powerful. It wasn't rehearsed or taught. It came naturally, effortlessly. His heart swelled. "That's perfect," he whispered, kneeling beside them, his voice breaking with emotion. "It's the most beautiful castle I've ever seen." The boys laughed, hugging him from all sides, their little arms wrapping around his neck. And in that moment, Alexander Knight, the man who once built empires, realized he'd just built something far more meaningful, a family. That night, after tucking the triplets into bed, he found Isabella sitting on the porch, her gaze lost in the moonlit sky. The air between them was still, soft, sacred. "Thank you," he said quietly, standing beside her. She looked at him. "For what?" "For giving me a reason to smile again. For bringing them here, for bringing you back." She took a deep breath, her eyes shimmering in the silver light. "I didn't come back for you, Alexander. I came because they deserved to know their father." He nodded slowly, his voice filled with humility. "Then let me be one. Not just in name but in heart." Isabella studied him for a long moment. The man beside her was no longer the proud tycoon she had left. There was warmth in his eyes now, vulnerability in his words. He had changed, not for show but for love. The wind carried the faint scent of jasmine as he stepped closer. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly, "if maybe we were never broken, just unfinished?" Her lips parted, trembling with emotion. "Maybe," she whispered. And for the first time in years she didn't pull away when he reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like 2 pieces of a story finally finding their way back together. As the night wrapped around them, Isabella leaned her head on his shoulder, and Alexander closed his eyes, breathing her in. The scent of forgiveness, of hope, of love reborn. The stars shimmered above, silent witnesses to a miracle, the kind that only innocence can inspire, and only love can sustain. For the first time in forever, the walls around Alexander's heart were gone, and in their place stood 3 little boys, one extraordinary woman, and the man he had always been meant to be. The nights at Harrison Ridge Farm had grown softer since Isabella and the triplets arrived. The once echoing mansion, a shrine of silence and marble, now glowed with the warmth of life. The faint laughter of children drifted through the halls like music, and the faint scent of freshly baked cookies lingered in the air. A scent Alexander hadn't realized he missed. It was a strange, beautiful paradox, how love could return in the most ordinary of moments. Each evening, when the sun dipped below the hills, Alexander found himself watching Isabella. Sometimes she was sitting by the fireplace, reading bedtime stories to the boys. Sometimes she was in the garden, her dress brushing against the lavender blooms as she hummed softly under her breath. He had spent years trying to forget her. But how could he forget the woman who once held his heart so completely, and now held his entire world in her hands again? One golden afternoon, while the triplets napped, Alexander found her in the greenhouse, surrounded by roses, sunlight, and silence. She wore a soft beige dress, her hair loosely tied, a few curls escaping to dance across her cheeks. Her fingers brushed gently against a rose petal, the way one might touch something sacred. "He's still your favorite flower," he said from the doorway, his voice low, tender. She didn't look up. "They remind me of life," she replied. "Delicate, but beautiful, if cared for." He stepped closer, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the roses. "I didn't know how to care for you then," he admitted quietly. "I thought love was about providing, not feeling." Isabella turned to face him, her eyes glistening under the golden light. "You built me a palace, Alexander, but I was lonely inside it." He inhaled deeply, guilt flooding his chest. "I know." His voice was raw, stripped of pride. "And I hate that I let you feel alone, when all I ever wanted was to keep you safe." "Safe isn't the same as loved," she whispered. The words cut like silk, soft but sharp. He took another step closer until he stood just inches away. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the electricity of unspoken emotion. "Isabella," he murmured, his voice trembling, "teach me how to love you the right way this time." Her breath caught. "And if I can't, then I'll spend the rest of my life learning." Silence, only the rustling of roses and the faint rhythm of two hearts remembering what they once were. That evening, the rain came, soft at first, then steady, painting the world silver. The triplets squealed with joy, running barefoot under the downpour, while Isabella tried to chase them back inside, laughter bubbling from her lips. From the porch, Alexander watched them, his heart full. The sight, his children playing in the rain, Isabella's laughter mingling with theirs, felt like redemption. Suddenly, Isabella slipped, her foot skidding against the wet stone. Before she could fall, Alexander was there, arms wrapping around her, pulling her close, the rain cascading over them both. For a moment, time froze. Her hands rested on his chest, his heart pounding beneath her touch. The raindrops clung to her eyelashes, her hair plastered against her skin. "You always catch me," she whispered, breathless. "I always will," he said softly, his thumb brushing a droplet from her cheek. Their eyes locked, and in that gaze was every word they'd never said, every apology, every memory, every dream that had been left unfinished. The rain fell harder, surrounding them in a silver curtain, but they didn't move. Slowly Alexander leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from hers. "I missed this," he murmured. "Which part?" she asked, her voice trembling. He smiled faintly. "The way the world disappears when I look at you." And then he kissed her, gently, reverently, as if he were afraid she might vanish again. The rain didn't matter. The past didn't matter. For that single, fragile moment, only love existed. Later, as the storm faded into a soft drizzle, they sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the boys fall asleep by the fire inside. "You've changed," Isabella said quietly, resting her head on his shoulder. Alexander nodded. "I had to lose you to learn what love truly costs." She smiled faintly. "And what did you learn?" He looked down at her, his voice deep and sincere. "That love isn't about control, or success, or promises. It's about presence. It's about showing up, even when it hurts." Her fingers intertwined with his. "You sound like the man I always hoped you'd become." "And you," he said softly, brushing his lips over her hair, "are still the woman I'll spend my life trying to deserve." The night grew quieter, the world outside shimmering with the remnants of rain. The pain of their past, the misunderstandings, the pride, the distance, no longer felt like scars. It felt like the soil where something new was growing. Forgiveness, love reborn not from perfection but from imperfection embraced. Under that quiet night sky, Alexander whispered, "I don't want to erase the past anymore, Isabella. I want to rewrite it. With you." She smiled through tears, her voice barely audible. "Then start with tomorrow." And as the wind carried the scent of rain and roses, he whispered back, "Tomorrow, and every day after." The billionaire who once believed love was weakness had finally learned the truth, that love, in its purest form, was strength. And as he held the woman who had once been his greatest loss, he knew she was now his greatest redemption. Dawn arrived softly over Harrison Ridge Farm, painting the sky in blush tones of rose and gold. The morning mist curled around the hills like a secret whispered by heaven itself. Birds began to sing, and somewhere in the distance, laughter echoed, the laughter of 3 little boys chasing sunlight through the fields. Inside the grand estate, Alexander Knight stood by the window of his study, watching them, his sons, his future. He had traded boardrooms for breakfast tables, conference calls for bedtime stories. His world had shifted, and for the first time in his life, it finally felt right. The billionaire who once lived for profit now lived for purpose. Behind him, the soft rustle of a dress made him turn. Isabella stood in the doorway, her hair tumbling in gentle curls, the morning light tracing every line of her face with tenderness. She looked breathtaking, effortlessly elegant, radiating the kind of beauty that comes from peace, not perfection. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good doesn't even begin to describe it," he replied, his voice low, a smile touching his lips. She laughed, her eyes glimmering like sunlight on water. "You've become quite the charmer lately." He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "No," he said. "I've just remembered how to see beauty again." Their silence said more than words. The months they had spent rediscovering each other had turned the sharp edges of their past into something softer, something sacred. Later that day, they decided to take the triplets to the lake that bordered the far edge of the property. The same lake where, years ago, Alexander had promised Isabella forever. Back then, forever had seemed like a word too heavy to carry. But now, standing on that familiar shore, with their children's laughter floating through the air, it felt light again, like destiny finally forgiving them. The water shimmered like liquid crystal, reflecting the sunlight and their reflection. A family whole at last. "Do you remember this place?" Isabella asked, kneeling beside the boys as they threw pebbles into the water. "How could I forget?" Alexander said quietly, his eyes tracing the line where water met sky. "This is where I asked you to be mine, and where I lost you." She looked up, her eyes soft. "And now," he met her gaze, "now it's where I want to begin again." Her breath caught as he reached into his pocket. Her heart stilled. He wasn't holding a grand velvet box this time. No diamonds, no extravagant gesture. Just a simple silver ring, elegant and timeless. "I don't need a ballroom or a crowd," he said gently. "I don't need fireworks or music. I just need you, here in this moment as we were always meant to be." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "Alexander." He stepped closer, his voice trembling with truth. "I've made every mistake a man can make. I let pride destroy what love built. But I won't make that mistake again. You and these boys, you're my everything. My empire means nothing without you in it." He took her hand, his thumb brushing against her skin. "Marry me again. Not for luxury, not for name, but for love. The kind that survives time, distance, and pain." The wind danced around them, carrying the scent of roses and lake water. Isabella's eyes filled with tears that fell like diamonds onto her cheeks. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You don't have to prove anything anymore." He smiled softly. "Then say yes. And let me love you for the rest of my life." The world seemed to hold its breath. The lake shimmered. The boys' laughter faded into the background. And then she nodded, a small, beautiful, tearful nod. "Yes," she breathed. 1,000 times yes. Alexander exhaled, his smile breaking into pure, unrestrained joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her close. The woman he had once lost, the woman he had finally learned to cherish. The triplets, sensing the magic of the moment, ran toward them. "Papa!" they shouted, wrapping their tiny arms around their parents' legs. Isabella laughed through her tears, looking down at them. Alexander bent, lifting 2 of the boys in his arms, while the third clung to Isabella. Together they stood in a perfect, tangled embrace, laughter, tears, and sunlight blending into something eternal. That evening, the farm glowed under the amber light of sunset. The workers gathered outside, clapping and cheering as word spread through the estate. The master and lady of Harrison Ridge were to be remarried. The garden came alive with lights strung between the trees, the scent of jasmine filling the air. Isabella walked down a path lined with petals, barefoot, her white dress flowing like silk in the breeze. Alexander waited beneath the oak tree, the same one where he had first kissed her, where he had once whispered, "Forever." When she reached him, he took her hands, his eyes glistening. "You've given me back my soul," he whispered. "And you've given me back my heart," she replied softly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he kissed her, slow, deep, eternal, while the triplets clapped and giggled nearby. The moment was simple yet more beautiful than any luxury he'd ever known. Because love, true love, doesn't need wealth to shine. It only needs two hearts that never stop finding their way back to each other. That night, as stars scattered across the velvet sky, Alexander and Isabella stood on the balcony overlooking their land. The farm, once a place of loneliness, now glowed with laughter and life. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "Do you think we'll get it right this time?" she whispered. He smiled, kissing her hair. "We already have. Because this time, we're not fighting the world, we're building it together." And as the soft wind brushed past them, carrying the scent of roses and rain, they knew forever wasn't something they had lost. It had simply been waiting for them to come home. As night descended over Harrison Ridge Farm, the world seemed to exhale, a gentle sigh of peace after years of storms. The farmhouse lights glowed like golden constellations against the vast velvet sky. The wind carried the laughter of 3 little boys, their joy pure and unshakable, the sound of a love reborn. Inside, Alexander and Isabella sat on the porch, their hands intertwined, watching their sons chase fireflies. For a moment, everything stilled, the past, the pain, the pride, all dissolved into the serenity of the present. He looked at her, truly looked, as though memorizing every detail, the curve of her smile, the glimmer in her eyes, the way her hair danced in the breeze. "I used to believe love was something you earned," he whispered. "But I was wrong. Love was always here, waiting for me to become the man you deserved." She smiled softly, tears shimmering in her eyes. "And I was waiting for you to remember who you really were. Not the billionaire, not the empire, but the man who loved the sound of the rain and the smell of the earth." They leaned into each other, their silhouettes framed by the glow of lanterns and the scent of jasmine drifting through the night. It was the kind of beauty that luxury could never buy, the kind only found when hearts choose forgiveness over pride and love over ego. The triplets ran up the steps, curling into their parents' arms, their laughter blending with the whisper of the wind. Alexander kissed Isabella's forehead, his voice low and reverent. This is everything I ever wanted." She looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "And everything we almost lost," he smiled. "But fate has a way of rewriting love stories, if the hearts are willing to try again." As the stars glimmered above them, the night wrapped around the Knight family like a blessing. No boardrooms, no fortunes, no headlines, just love, raw, real, eternal. And for the first time in forever, Alexander Knight realized that home wasn't a mansion of marble and glass. Home was the sound of her laughter. Home was the warmth of her touch. Home was the echo of their children's joy beneath a sky that had forgiven everything. Because in the end, no matter the distance, no matter the years, true love doesn't fade. It finds its way home.